Okay, we've all been there, right? It's been a brutal day, just one thing after another, and suddenly you find yourself staring into the fridge. Or maybe you're already halfway through a bag of chips. You're not alone in that. Today, we're going to get into the actual science of what's happening in your brain and your body at that moment. We're talking about stress eating.
So let's just ask the big question right up front. Why? Why, when we're under pressure, does our body scream for pizza or ice cream and not, a nice kale salad? It really feels like a personal failing, like our willpower just crumbles. But the biology behind it is way more interesting and honestly, a lot more complex than that. And here's where it gets kind of weird. This is the central paradox we need to solve. Your body's immediate, first response to a stressful situation like, say, a car suddenly swerving in front of you, is to completely kill your appetite. Seriously, food is the last thing on your mind. So, if that's true, how do we get from I can't eat a thing to a full-on comfort food binge?
Well, the answer is that your body doesn't just have one response to stress. It has two distinct phases. There's that initial split-second reaction, and then there's the longer, drawn-out response. And it's in that second phase that the switch gets flipped. Now, to get this, you have to meet the main character in our story, something called the HPA axis. Don't worry about the long name, just think of it as your body's emergency response system. It's the central command center that controls your entire hormonal reaction when your brain senses a threat.
And this is where that two-phase response really becomes clear. In a moment of acute stress, that classic fight or flight scenario, the HPA axis pumps out a hormone called CRH. Its job is to turn your appetite off. It needs all your resources focused on escaping the danger. But with chronic stress, that week that just won't end, a totally different hormone takes the lead, cortisol. And its main job is the exact opposite. It turns your appetite on, telling your body it's time to refuel.
And that is the absolute key to this whole thing. Our bodies are built for short, physical threats that we can run away from. But our modern lives, they're full of long-term psychological stress. So that refuel signal from cortisol, it just gets stuck in the on position. It's constantly telling your body to stock up on energy that you never actually burned running from a saber-toothed tiger.
But wait, it gets deeper. It's not just about a hormonal signal to eat. This constant stress actually starts to change the way your brain works. It literally begins to hijack the reward and decision-making centers in your head.
And that's what leads us to cravings. A craving isn't just regular hunger. The scientific definition is pretty spot on. It's an intense, very specific desire for a certain kind of food, and it feels incredibly difficult, almost impossible to resist.
So why that specific bag of chips or pint of ice cream? It turns out cortisol doesn't just make you hungry in general. Nope, it makes you hungry for what scientists call palatable foods, which is just a fancy way of saying stuff that's high in fat, sugar, and calories. The good stuff. Stress literally makes the reward centers in your brain more sensitive, almost desperate for the pleasure hit these foods deliver.
Because when you do eat that food, boom, your brain gets a massive rush of feel-good chemicals like dopamine. It's a fast, easy, and super reliable way to get a short-term dose of pleasure and relief when you're feeling totally overwhelmed.
And get this is some really new and fascinating science. Researchers have found that chronic stress can actually silence a tiny part of your brain called the lateral habenula. Now, this area is basically the off switch. It's the part that tells your reward system, okay, that's enough, you're full now. But under chronic stress, that little voice goes quiet, and the reward signals are just left to run wild.
So you put all these pieces together, the hormones, the brain chemistry, the silenced off switch, and what you get is a really powerful self-reinforcing cycle. It becomes this trap that is incredibly hard to escape with just willpower.
Let's walk through it. So first you've got the chronic stress, which turns on your HPA axis. Cortisol goes up and you start craving those high-calorie foods. Then you eat them. And here's the kicker. That food doesn't just taste good. The act of eating it actually sends a signal back to your HPA axis and temporarily shuts it down. So you genuinely feel better. And that feeling powerfully reinforces the lesson in your brain. Hey, when you're stressed, eating this stuff works.
And I want to be clear, this isn't just in your head. This is a real, measurable biological effect. As this quote from the research puts it, a junk food binge can actually alleviate the physical symptoms of stress. It works in the short term. And because it works, your brain learns to go back to it again and again. It's a survival mechanism.
Okay, so that's the immediate loop you can get stuck in. But what happens when that loop plays out over months or years? Well, this whole mechanism has some pretty serious long-term consequences, and it turns out it can even be influenced by what happened to us when we were very young.
On a physical level, one of the biggest dangers of having high cortisol all the time is how it tells your body to store fat. It doesn't just make you store more fat in general. It specifically encourages the buildup of visceral fat. That's the really dangerous stuff that wraps around your internal organs.
And the connections here run incredibly deep, all the way back to childhood. Research shows that experiencing significant stress early in life, when your brain is still developing, can permanently change how these pathways are wired. It can basically program your brain to be more sensitive to both stress and the rewarding pull of comfort food for your entire life. The science also shows some pretty significant differences between men and women. Now, this isn't true for everyone, of course, but on average, studies find that women are more likely to turn to food in response to stress. Brain scans even show that in women, certain brain areas tied to emotion light up more intensely in response to food cues, especially when they're stressed. The link between emotion and eating just seems to be more tightly wired.
So, after all of this, what's the one thing you should walk away with? It's this. Stress eating is not a failure of willpower. It's not a character flaw. It is a deep-seated survival mechanism that was designed for a different world, and it has been completely hijacked by the unique, constant pressures of our modern lives.
And that really leaves us with a final, really important question to think about. If this is all true, if stress eating is about our biology, not our character, then how should that change everything about how we approach health, wellness, and our own relationship with food? That's definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining me.